You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Joining us now on the Hazard Ground Podcast, his name is Joshua Brandon. He has had 3 deployments to Iraq. You may have seen his face and heard a little bit about his story on About Face, which is the government's PTSD veterans website that they're trying to reach out with people, and that's one of the hopes we have for this podcast is that, you know, if we can get some soldiers, airmen, Marines, whoever it is, who may be struggling and are having a tough time to come to the forefront and start sharing their story and help with a little bit of therapy, that's certainly what we want to do here on the Hazard Ground Podcast. But let's welcome in Joshua Brandon. Joshua, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to take the time to talk to you and hopefully reach out to some of our vets out there.
All right, well, let's start with the beginning of your story, and it's the first question we always ask everybody. Why did you join the military?
Yeah, it's kind of a couple major influences. You know, I grew up back in the 80s, and besides, you know, you had the Cold War going on, and then the U.S. Army had the best propaganda show that they never sponsored, which was the G.I. Joe cartoon. You know, and those combined, I had 2 grandfathers that had served in Vietnam. That all those kind of came together. That from an early age, I knew that I wanted to be a soldier. And you know, and as I grew older, and you start to read, you know, the public service and kind of a debt to country plays in it as well. But I honestly attribute like the G.I. Joe cartoon at the earliest stage of getting me interested in serving.
So when you realized that you wanted to go, I mean, was that something that you went through high school knowing that it was going to be your path, or was it something that when you got to high school or college you had a better idea? How did that go?
Yeah, I think I just always wanted to serve, and I had no idea what that was. When I was in high school, I was kind of I was a bad kid. I was, you know, constantly getting in trouble, barely graduated. And, you know, as I was looking around at colleges or what I was going to do afterwards, you know, my mother kind of set the ground rules of, hey, you can go to the Citadel or VMI, or you can enlist. And I checked out the different schools, and you know, Charleston had the best town, and so I was like, all right, I'm heading to the Citadel. And it ends up it's kind of like the West Point for bad kids, in my opinion.
That's funny the way you phrase it.
Anybody can go there, but you know, what you do with yourself while you're there and what you do afterwards, it's an awesome institution to be able to go in and you know, I don't want to call it a second chance, but yeah, I guess it's almost a second chance.
It's funny that you characterize it that way. I mean, I went ROTC, so that's how I was commissioned, and I like to say, hey, I went to college. And unfortunately, people went to West Point, didn't really go to college, but it's a much different experience there, obviously. But, you know, in the Citadel and VMI, I knew that they were military schools, but for some reason they don't get the same kind of love and the same kind of adoration that West Point and the Naval Academy and the Air Force, it's just different.
Well, I think if they had better sports teams, they might start getting some attention. Although we did do well in football this year, so there's always hope. But yeah, I mean, we've always kind of been I can speak for the Citadel. We've always kind of been like this little redheaded stepchild in the academies, but you know, we kind of pride ourselves on that. There's a lot of just a history of really, you know, combat oriented and kind of crazy officers that come out of there that have been effective and good leaders, and you know. Yeah, I guess it is what it is, yeah.
Was there any point when you first got to the Citadel and you're going through the whole thing and you thought to yourself, man, I made a mistake?
Yeah, I think the whole freshman year, you kind of ask yourself that every day. When I talk to friends and, you know, they're having a blast in college, and I'm like, I've got a shaved head, terrible clothing, and it's not fun at all. And, but yeah, honestly, probably the very first time in the first minute Hell Week started, I was like, what the hell am I doing here? But I mean, again, it's a great place, or it's a terrible place to be at. It's a great place to be from. So, you know, I wouldn't trade it for the world.
What was Hell Week like? What do you remember the most about it?
I remember all of us looked really ugly and sweaty because we all had shaved heads and we're all like in that awkward 18 age. And I remember a bunch of dudes that were slightly older than me and had really heavy Southern accents, and I grew up in Cleveland, screaming at us the whole week. So it's basically just a blur of getting, like, you know, a really rough week of getting yelled at and having to do all sorts of unpleasant things.
Well, and Hell Week, for those listening who aren't familiar with it, they have it at several different military places. Most notably, SEALs go through Hell Week. And SF guys, when they get to their training, go through some version of Hell Week. And it's got the name for a obvious reason. And it's different at, where you were at the Citadel. They're not trying to necessarily break you mentally, but they're just trying to give you, I would assume, some structure, discipline, and they kind of let you know that, hey, these are the rules, these are the people in charge, and this is what the expectations are, correct?
Yeah, I mean, and there is that breakdown process. At least I remember that. They literally, within a week or two, a lot of us were very different people after that first week, and then getting into when the semester started. They really break you down and try to change you. And, especially for guys like me, I needed that because, frankly, I was kind of an ass in high school, and, I needed a kind of a reboot to get going.
Was there a point where you felt broken during Hell Week? You're like, I can't take this? Or was there a point where you're like, yeah, I've got to change? I mean, any sort of epiphany, if you will?
No, I never felt broken. I would call it more like I'm just resigned to suffer for the next 9 months. You get that resignation, and you're like, all right, I'm going to do it. Like, all right.
All right, so you get through Hell Week, you survive, you go through your freshman year. At some point, I would assume you realize that, hey, you know what, this is for me, and I'm on the right path, I'm on the good path. Where was that?
Well, I don't want to make it sound like like Hell Week. I came out as completely on the other side. I actually ended up rebelling a little bit, and probably not the best school to go to rebel. Yeah, I ended up getting suspended for a year for various amounts of bad behavior.
Really?
And general skullduggery and stuff like that. But I think after I came back from that suspension, and by the way, I thought it was probably the best thing that happened to me because I got to, put 4 years of college without the academics in 1 year, and then went back. And I think it's when I went back that's where the switch finally, I flipped that. Like, all right, it's time to man up, and you're going to be an officer in a year or two. Let's roll with it.
What did your parents say when you got suspended?
Well, yeah, they weren't too pleased. Unlike the academies, you got to pay for the Citadel, and I had a little bit of Army scholarship, but they weren't happy at all. But I think once I graduated, it was more of a sigh of relief, and they'd come to see it. It has, it's been well worth it.
All right, so you tough it out, and you survive the 4 years. You get commissioned when? What time frame?
I got my commission in, I want to say May of 2002. And, a month later, I was off in the Army basic course. And at that point, that was, 9/11 had already happened, and all the rumblings about Iraq, it was still kind of being debated on the national scene. It was a done deal, at least with, with us know nothing lieutenants, where we were concerned, we were going to Iraq. And kind of an interesting way to go through training, because it's not if you go to war this will happen. It's like, nah, guys are already fighting and dying in Afghanistan. Iraq is around the corner. We don't have time for anything. Like, you're getting trained, you're going to unit, you're going to war.
And the basic course, much like you have basic training for enlisted folks, officers, when they get commissioned, they go to their basic course to learn the ins and outs, not only of kind of how you're a leader, but also your specific military skill. You were an infantry officer, so you went to Fort Benning. You did your basic course there, and you got all the ins and outs of how to be an infantry officer. When you're going through that environment and everyone is so focused on war, did you wonder if at that point in time that maybe I made a mistake, or were you like, hey, I'm ready for this?
No, I mean, you're either all in or you're all out as far as I'm concerned. And no, it was just a matter of fact. And I think the war footing part, it was always kind of just, you can't really describe or really get a good feel for it until, training is training. But once I got to my unit at Fort Campbell in the 101st, that's when it really hit me. You walk in and there's these seasoned soldiers and NCOs, and they're like, yeah, we're going to war. We're changing our training, and the calendar stops. Late winter, early spring. Guess what? And that's where it really hit me that holy shit, I'm going to war. At that point, you're young, you got a little indoctrination in you, and it's kind of badass. We got a badass history as Americans going to war, and never really crossed my mind that there's anything wrong with it or it was a mistake. It was just, but yeah, you're at this unit, you're ready to go to war, and you're almost too busy to even think about whether it was right or not. You're just excited and ready to go.
I run into a lot of different types of people, and this isn't only officers, but it's enlisted. When you find out that you're going to war or there's the notion, there are some people who react, some military folks are like, hell yeah, we're going to go kick some ass, and this is what we're trained for, and let's go. They get excited. They literally get excited for the near-death experience they're about to walk into. Other people seem to be more pragmatic about it. They're like, look, here are the risks, here are the pluses, the minuses, whatever it may be, and they just take a much more level-headed approach. Which one of those were you?
I mean, I kind of think somewhere in the middle, maybe. I think I was too, you're like, I'm following, I was excited to follow in, footsteps of not only some of my family members, but, I'm going to war in the 101st Airborne Division, like the legacy of Bastogne and, the Battle of the Bulge is everywhere. So you're kind of excited and honored at one point. But on the flip side, as a leader, you're looking around, and I've got 42 guys underneath me, all of whom have families. And, that's a huge burden. That's a huge weight on your shoulders that you take seriously. And, you're not going there to, kick ass and beat the other team. You're going down there to go toe-to-toe with other armed men that don't want you there and end their lives. It's an instrument of strategic policy for your country. So it's I think in some moments when you're throwing back some Guinness in the pub, you're like, hell yeah, we're going to war at the 101st. But for the most part, it's a very sobering experience when you're gearing up to go.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know about you. I remember vividly when I got off the plane in Kuwait. It wasn't even in Iraq. When I got off the plane in Kuwait, and that sun and that heat hits you for the first time, realness becomes real. I know that's redundant, but I'm sure you went through the same thing, and that's the question. At what point when you got there, or was it any time before that all of a sudden you're like, hey, it's game on?
Yeah, it was, from what I can remember, I remember a lot being at Camp Pennsylvania prior to the initial invasion.
Which is in Kuwait, by the way.
Yeah, which is in Kuwait, yeah. And we were doing a lot of, just last-minute, small arms training, taking any time we could to really, go over, platoon-level battle drills and, et cetera. And it really didn't kick off. And, there's two things that really kicked it in for me. And it was actually like, yeah, the war is here. One, the first unit I was in the 101st was Battle Force, which was in 327 Brigade. And they had the incident where a soldier threw a couple grenades in the brigade command area.
Yep, I remember it.
So, when that went down, we didn't know it was one of our guys. It could have been infiltration for all we knew. And then, so we're out running patrols and kicking into high gear. And I think the second one too is when when the Scud missiles, when we're waiting for Scud missiles to kind of land in the camp, and the airstrikes are going over, and we're throwing on mop gear, every 20 minutes during dinner or while you're trying to read a book. You can't. Generally, just kind of a pain in the ass because you're sitting there waiting to get bombed or waiting to get gassed, and of course that never happened. But that's when it really kicked in for me that this is real. We're about to go.
As you were going through training and you get to Camp Pennsylvania, move on, did you feel like your guys were ready? Did you feel like you had done what you were trained to do to get your platoon ready to go to war?
Yeah, I'd only had about 3 months with my platoon prior to going, and thankfully I stepped into a unit where my platoon sergeant, my squad leaders, and the soldiers had been together for quite some time. And they were hot, man. They were on it. They knew, and I was playing catch up to keep up with them and learning a lot from them before going over the berm. The company I was in was, they called it the main effort company, the battalion. I was just surrounded by, warriors, and I couldn't have been more confident going in with who was to my left and right, and who was under me and who was over me.
All right, so you get into Iraq. Your first taste of combat, what was it?
I think, the first taste of direct contact was some small arms fire when we were moving into the city of Najaf. Third ID had kind of they were doing their blitz through the Iraqi desert. They bypassed Najaf, and the 101st was going in and taking, kind of securing the urban areas. And it wasn't much of a first firefight, It was just a couple Iraqi machine guns, most likely just kind of trying to disrupt us and slow us down so that they can kind of withdraw Fedayeen forces. But yeah, I mean that first rooster tail comes running right by you, and you're like, oh well, I guess I'm getting shot at. This isn't like the movies. All right, I'm too busy to care. Let's keep going.
And for those who don't know, I always like to give people reference points. Najaf is probably about 2.5, maybe 3 hours, maybe even longer than that. It's directly south of Baghdad on the Euphrates River. Again, for the people who are familiar with the lay of the land, it's definitely desert, but you weren't too far from the Euphrates and south of Baghdad, but definitely way north of Basra where the water was and everything. But, that's an area of Iraq. I never got a chance to go there, but there's not a lot of there are towns and cities and things of that nature, but pretty isolated, no?
Yeah, it's pretty flat. You've got your agricultural lands, but at that point in the war, it wasn't like 06 or 09 where you're fighting an insurgency. We were still, the most irregular forces we were fighting were, the Fedayeen, who were basically just stripping off their uniforms and trying to disrupt as much as they could. And yeah, in the urban area, we'd already had a little bit of practice in urban fighting, so it wasn't much of a huge deal for us to go into town. Granted, we weren't as developed as we were later on, but I would have to say on a side note, one of the most striking things about fighting over there wasn't necessarily the terrain, but you pull into the Euphrates River, and we're like, okay, we fought to the Euphrates River. Holy crap, this is the Euphrates River. This is the Tigris and Euphrates. It's the cradle of civilization. The Alexanders come through here, the Persians, the Romans, the Mohammedans, the Brits. And it's almost a sense of history hits you that you're just another one in a long line of fighters that have ruled through this area for centuries. So there's a kind of a really neat, overhanging theme of why you're going through and invading or liberating or whatever you want to call our first year in Iraq.
What was the tempo like? I mean, again, you're talking about 2003, so you were there for OIF 1. This is the initial invasion and the follow-up push. I didn't get there till the tail end of OIF 2 into OIF 3, and I know what it was like then, but most of the people I've talked to at that time, it wasn't as crazy as it was later on in the war. It was actually pretty easy to deal with once you got past the initial invasion. There was a kind of a calm, correct?
Yeah, we had ended up, there was some sporadic fighting through Najaf and then up into Baghdad. But essentially, we were just chasing tanks at that point. It was classic blitzkrieg. Once we'd gotten up to Mosul, there was a couple months there where you kind of heard some stuff about some rumblings of the insurgency, but of course, we're hearing from the locals and the higher ups telling there's no insurgency, and it was pretty quiet for a couple months. And then right around, I would say about August, September, that's when the insurgency in earnest, at least from my perspective, started up in Mosul. That's when we started getting more sniper fire. IEDs, started coming out of nowhere, and random RPG attacks when you're on patrol, and granted, it still wasn't as hot or as sophisticated as it was, say it was when I was in Baghdad in 06, but it was just kind of the birth of that insurgency.
Oh, so just for clarification, because I'm not sure. So you initially inserted into Najaf following, as you said, third ID, but you moved all the way north to Mosul. Is that correct?
Yeah,
How long did that take?
We kind of chased we chased the tanks from Najaf and then up to Baghdad, and once they started, basically once the Iraqi army just evaporated, they cordoned off the country and cut it up into sections, and the 101st took northern Iraq, and we were attached. We were third of the 327th, and we had gotten attached to 502nd, another brigade in the 101st. Up in Mosul to kind of start occupation, and then inadvertently stumbling into counterinsurgency operations.
So how long did that take you guys? I mean, Mosul to Najaf it's about 8 hours. So you're talking about a distance from like New York City to South Carolina. I mean, how long did it take you to get from point A to point B as a unit?
We mostly flew, thankfully.
Oh, okay. So you weren't like humping all the way through on vehicles and convoying up there.
No, that was one of the side benefits of the 101st. Is we like to joke that we're the world's premier truck assault division, but the helicopters were there when we needed it, and we managed to hitch a ride up there, thankfully.
Oh, okay, all right. So because that to me would have been an incredible experience. I mean, obviously, provided everybody made it alive, but to be able to do that and go on that first push, I haven't had a chance to talk to a lot of people who were on that initial push, but that seems incredible. Did you end up losing any guys on that first deployment?
Within the platoon, no.
Okay.
Within the company, yes. Right when the insurgency kicked in, we'd had a couple wounded, but one of the first major attacks against our company was it was against another platoon and some elements in headquarters. And whether they were, I think people were establishing patterns, or we were just predictable, and we weren't quite being nimble enough to fight the insurgency. Long story short, they were changing out a control or a command post, an observation post, and they got attacked with an RPG as they were loading up on the vehicles. Good buddy of mine and our supply sergeant were killed and maimed in that attack. And that was kind of a wake up call too for, hey, you guys know these tactics. It's real. The insurgency is real, no matter what you're hearing on CNN or what you're hearing from DC. So the war's not over. Stop thinking about going home. Get after it.
Did that kind of send shockwaves throughout your platoon or to you that, hey, I mean, we've talked so much about it being real, but it's weird how you get to new degrees of real every time something happens the first time.
I think, when you lose somebody, it definitely sends shockwaves, but, I have to say I was proud of my guys that they never let it stop being real. We always took everything as if, there was, life and death consequences, which is what they were. We took every mission as if, we were, assaulting the Siegfried line or something like that. And I think it just kind of confirmed what we had been doing all along, as opposed to having us change up what we were doing.
Okay, so you finished the first deployment and you get home when?
I got home in, I don't even remember now. It was the winter of 03-04.
Okay, and when you got back, did you take some leave, or you were a single guy at this point in time, I assume? You didn't really meet anybody on the deployment, obviously.
No, I was actually she wasn't my wife at the time, but I guess you can say my live-in girlfriend, Kristen, who'd go on to be my wife. We'd been living together. Well, if you can call it living together, I was off in Army training and then off in Iraq when she was, living in Cleveland. And but I came home, got to see her, and of course all of them, I remember them saying, like, oh, God, you're changed. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not. But, take some leave, and then really kind of got back into the swing of, like, what's next? When are we going back? Because we'd heard that, you get buddies all over the Army, and that's when, some of my Marine buddies and then some of my other Army buddies were gearing up for, Fallujah. And, like, well, hey, this isn't over. It's actually going to be a long road. And so really just got back to the mindset of, like, let's drink a bunch of Guinness and start training again and get ready to go back.
You mentioned that friends and family members, loved ones said that you were changed. Did they say how?
I honestly don't remember. I know I think it's such an uncomfortable thing, and PTSD, especially at that point, there was such a stigma around it that people basically looked at it as like, crazy Vietnam vet, homeless guy, or Rambo, or Patton slapping a soldier at that point, that, people just didn't talk about it. I think they wanted to highlight the positive changes in me as opposed to the negative. But looking back on it, it was readily apparent. We spent most of our time, we were drinking hard. We were drinking several nights a week. I got into mixed martial arts at the time to kind of channel some of that stuff. And, surprisingly enough, drinking a lot of Guinness and mixed martial arts is not a good cure for PTSD. But I also think people didn't know enough about it, and people were just kind of too polite or didn't know how to broach the subject that, of course Kristen would say things to me, but really, it was just like, oh, that's just what it is. That they're soldiers. They're crazy. They're going to go back to war.
Well, and the hard part is that it's hard to talk about anything that went on over there and any of your experiences with people who aren't in the military, because they'll never understand. They can't understand. It's not that they are not empathetic or anything like that. Just if you're not there, you'd have to sit there and literally talk for hours to describe something very simple just to give people a basic picture. So it's hard to talk to people who weren't there. On the flip side, if you talk to about it to people who were there, you're afraid that they will look at you as weak. And that is the stigma early on with PTSD that was very, very tough, because I'm sure, well, a lot of you guys are saying, hey, let's go back again. If you would have said, man, I don't really know. I don't really feel like I'm feeling okay, they would look at you cross-eyed as if you weren't a good leader.
Yeah, and that's one of the, and I don't think, I honestly don't have a negative, kind of view or memory of that, because, looking back on it now, it was ignorance, it was institutional ignorance.
Right.
For years, we had called, post-traumatic stress, there was cowardice. And, but, in later years, talking to family members who remember, like my grandfathers or, other members of the family that were in World War II and Vietnam, they saw that stuff, they saw the effects, and that same stuff went on, but it was just kind of shoved under the rug or put into a closet, and everybody put on this forward face of, everything's okay. Meanwhile, everything's not okay. That individual and that family, they're suffering on the inside, and I kind of like to compare it to, functional alcoholics. You can have severe PTSD, and especially in the military, and be incredibly functioning and hide it from people, for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent point. And as we always say on the podcast, we encourage it. Just talk to somebody, anybody. Just let people know that you're struggling, because there is help available. And with the suicide rate in the military, 22 a day, I mean, people should have heard enough about it by now. But seriously, 1 is too many and 22 is egregiously too many. So just a quick little public service announcement. Let's get back to you on your second deployment. You were awarded a Silver Star. Congratulations. Obviously, well-deserved. Tell me about that experience and exactly what happened that day.
I call that the wrong time, wrong place medal. That was an interesting day. It was kind of a summary for that middle tour and kind of the whole Civil War period in Iraq. It was in August, and where we were at, so kind of laying in the background of the story. I was with a small advisory team that was made up of soldiers from 506 Curry, the whole Band of Brothers regiment.
Right.
And there was about 30 or so of us that lived in a house, and we had some cool guys with beards that lived next door, and we lived on an Iraqi army compound, and we were directly attached to an Iraqi army battalion, 1st and the 26th Infantry. And we lived with them, we fought with them, we kind of had a huge variety of roles. We were there initially to do kind of like company and battalion staff level function and kind of, westernize their military. But as time went on, we were in Adamiyah, which is in northeast Baghdad. It's the Sunni stronghold, which borders on Sadr City, and it is the direct heart of some of the ethnic, cleansing and the civil war in that part of the city. And so we were, from the very beginning of the deployment, we were hooking and jabbing, and that's when the Samarra Mosque bombing happened. If you remember that?
Yes.
Al-Qaeda bombed a Shia shrine, and literally it was like a switch, and all the crazies came out, and the civil war started. And that night, I remember looking over, and we were watching on our Iraqiya, TV. I'm like, yeah, I think it's going to be a different deployment now.
And let me pause you right there, Josh. I'm sorry. I just kind of wanted to give some people some background for those who are listening who are not military and don't understand a couple of things. I sometimes have to do this just because I don't want you to get too deep in the story and people not being able to follow. What you were doing there, it's called a MIT team, MITT. The Army uses a lot of acronyms and abbreviations, but your job initially there as a MIT team, you're like embedded advisors, and you're supposed to help them, train them, grow them along the way. It's a hand-holding and then eventually a release to be able to let them do it on their own. In some places, in some areas in Iraq, it worked and it worked well. In other places, it took long amounts of time. It didn't really take. A lot of the reasons that it did or didn't depended on the Iraqi soldiers themselves. And when you reference Sadr City, we've talked with a couple people about that again. That is the equivalent of the most dangerous city in America. I mean, whether you want to pick Detroit, now I don't mean to cast aspersions on any of these cities, Detroit, Baltimore, whatever it may be, Sadr City was literally the most dangerous area in Baghdad, and it was so hard to get a hold of. We lost so many people around there, but as you said, the civil infighting there was also at an all-time high. So it was a powder keg area that you were operating in. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry, I wanted to just get that part in.
Sure, and what I would add to that too was when we got there, that northeast section of Baghdad, which was probably the most critical portion of the city and what ended up being the most violent, was handed over to an Iraqi division at that point. And so the only American forces there were us in this advisory team, and then some special operation forces that would operate in the area. And kind of looking back on it, I think that was one of a huge flaw in the overall strategy. Because we literally, took the most dangerous and hardcore area and handed it over to a battalion of Iraqi troops, who I love and fought tooth and nail with, but they were unprepared, and the powder keg kind of blew up from under us, and I think we helped light that.
And one other thing about Sadr City, it is a small confined area. I mean, you're talking literally less than maybe help me here, like maybe 2 or 3 square miles. It's not large at all. I mean, you could literally walk from one end of Sadr City to the other in under 30 minutes if you wanted to.
Yeah, and in Sadr City, just to be clear, Sadr City was just east of us. Our actual AO was Adamiyah, Shabaur, and basically the Sunni and Shia mixed area west of Sadr City.
Gotcha.
And so we were kind of smack dab in the middle, kind of on the front lines of the Sunni Shia ethnic cleansing.
Essentially, you're right on the Tigris River.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So pick it up. You're in August of 2006 again.
Yeah. Okay. And so leading up to that point, we'd been fighting left and right. And kind of the way it was supposed to work is the Iraqi army was fully trained and ready to go, and we were just going to advise them on staff functions. Well, as soon as bullets started flying, we not only trained them on staff functions, but we also kind of shadowed their commanders in the field. And then, when the shit hit the fan and the Iraqi unit was about to break, that's when we would step in and, either you'd be the first through the door, you'd be leading assaults with Iraqi soldiers through the streets. And so it was kind of a really an amazing experience because you did so many jobs on so many levels, from hanging out with the Iraqi Judi in a foxhole, so to speak, throwing rounds, to going back and working with the battalion commander, and then not sleeping and going and making sure their staffs were working. And so with that kind of said, in August, it was I think it was the 20th, 21st, 22nd, somewhere in there, and to kind of set the stage. The Stryker units had just done their big sweep of Baghdad. And Strykers are awesome unit. I ended up serving with them in my third deployment. But they'd essentially come in with all the cool toys and intelligent and clean an area. For us, it was an awesome vacation. So the 2 weeks prior, we just were able to kind of catch our breath, and we knew it was whack-a-mole. Everybody knew the strikers were coming. They announced it, and all the insurgents left. As soon as the strikers moved on to the next clearance area, everybody came back and decided that they were gonna tell us how happy they were with us clearing their city. At the same time, there was a major Shia holiday, and this is one where thousands of Shias would march through the street, some doing a self-flagellation where they would, beat themselves in honor and punishment of abandoning Ali at the Battle of Karbala, centuries prior. It's essentially a very sensitive religious holiday. And so that morning we get a call that our Iraqi soldiers are engaged, and the soldier that called me, he was a Kurd named Rashtak, and I love that company. They were just a hardcore group of little fighters, saved my life many times, went places with me that a lot of Americans wouldn't go, and completely fearless. And he gives me a call, and I can hear fear in his voice, and that just put the hair on my neck stood on end. And essentially what had happened is the Sunni nationalists had started firing into the Shia marchers on a highway that they were marching down between Sadr City and the Sunni neighborhood. Just kind of indiscriminately shooting them, trying to provoke a reaction from the security forces. Well, the security forces responded kind of heavy-handedly. So you have Shia army with tanks, Shia police forces, crossed over not only to defend the protesters, but to kind of punish the Sunni neighborhoods. Not only did they attack the insurgents, they started randomly pulling Sunnis out of their houses and executing them on the street. So our little Iraqi unit, and mind you, when I say Shia security forces, they are also operating side by side with Jaish al-Mahdi, the Mahdi militia, which is the Shia militia group under Muqtada al-Sadr based out of Sadr City. And so our little Iraqi army group was kind of caught in the middle. And so when we showed up on the scene, as the fighting was in full flex, you had Sunni nationalists, you had Al-Qaeda, you had the Iraqi security forces that were both Sunni and Shia, army, police, as well as Shia militia, and Americans for that matter, all kind of fighting together. The best example, I guess, is the Battle of Five Armies from The Hobbit. Not the movie, the book, but... And I remember pulling up, and I'm like, who the hell are we supposed to fight today? Everybody's here, everybody's pissed, and everybody's shooting at each other. And that's how the day started. I think, I don't really want to go like play by play, but essentially what we did was, we picked the greatest threat first, and also closest to us, which was, the Al-Qaeda and the Sunni nationalists. And with the Iraqi army, we kind of went house to house and cleared down some streets and either disrupted or killed their little groups of machine gunners that were attacking us and the Shia. And then once we quelled them, we had this big tide of Iraqi security forces and big wave of Mahdi militia coming over the bridge to basically commit genocide on this Sunni neighborhood. And so you have our small team, and mind you, our Iraqi army, which started with, probably 100 soldiers on the ground, either through casualties or fear, and kind of, boiled away to about 30 or 40. It's just us, a couple of machine guns, and some trucks, and this horde of Mahdi militia coming over. And I remember thinking, if we shoot, we're dead. And something just kind of clicked in my mind, and myself and one or two other guys that were standing with me, basically charged into the Mahdi militia guys and just started, swinging at them and throwing their weapons to the ground and trying to be as crazy as possible. And, I remember thinking at the time, I'm like, wow, this is how I'm going to die. Punching dudes and taking their weapons and, for what? And, well, it worked. They, literally the Shia tide kind of, I don't think they knew what to expect. They didn't expect a handful of Americans just to start, trying to start a fist fight with them. And we they ran back across the bridge. And, we continued to rip Mali militia members off the tanks and kick them back over the bridge. And just a really bizarre day. We kind of got some fisticuffs in. We got some fire maneuvering, and we fought for and fought with every side in the Civil War that day.
That's interesting. Do you recall about how many houses you ended up clearing?
Off the top of my head, between 5 and 10, we were so small we had to be very selective. At this point we're only clearing with like 2 or 3 Americans and 5 to 20 Iraqis, however many with us at the time. I do remember a funny story that day though. Speaking of the house clearing, we just chased a little machine gun team into a house, and we were going in to clear. Right before that, being super thirsty, and we're talking it's like 130 degrees out, and we're fighting during the day. Who fights in the day out there? Just no thanks. And I chugged. We had a bunch, the classic. We were kind of out of water, and there was some hot water bottles that were all dusty and dirty at the bottom of the Humvee. And I took one of those and chugged it, and then ran into the house. And I ended up having to take a knee out of the stack, and because I threw up all over the room just chugging this warm water. And so I come stumbling out the front door like, God damn it, I'm throwing up. Well, my medic sees me kind of go down to my knee and keep throwing up. He thinks I'm shot. He jumps out of the Humvee, runs over there and try, put his hands all over me trying to figure out what's wrong with me. And finally I'm like, dude, I just drank hot water. That's it. God damn it, I thought you were shot. And he just kicks me in the ass and runs back into the Humvee.
It's funny how you can find those little moments of levity and comedy in the most tense situations sometimes in combat. And it's almost needed because it just takes the edge off a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Hey, I mean, you got to focus on that stuff. I've always been fascinated about, how humans react, and that whole fight in the shade thing. You got to laugh in combat because, if you don't, what else are you going to do?
When you remember recalling that this is where I'm going to die and this is how I'm going to die, was there a different sense of fear? Did your body react weirdly?
No, I think at that point, I've had one of those moments probably about once a week for the past 4 or 5 months, just because we were so exposed and the fighting we were doing was so just outside of what what we'd been exposed to or what a lot of other people are doing. I'll say you're always scared, you're always terrified, but it's amazing how the body, how adrenaline, and how the mind and muscle memory can take that fear and kind of put a package around it. And you're like, okay, I'm going to die. And in another moment, or maybe at another time, you might defecate yourself or freak out. But because you're in such you're trained for it, and you kind of got some muscle memory from it. It's almost like not an out of body experience, but you're looking at the fear not as being washed over you, but you're kind of looking at it from the outside in, like, oh yeah. You're terrified, but you don't have time to be terrified. So think about it later.
I mean, we talk so much about facing your own mortality on the podcast because all of us who have been in that situation have dealt with it. And it's funny when it happens repeatedly, it's different for different people. I could just remember there were several times where I was going out on mission and I always felt like today's the day. I just had there were some days I felt invincible. There are other days where I just felt like today's the day. We've just rolled the dice too many times. We got to crap out. Just something bad is going to happen today. And those days were almost worse than anything else because when you have that notion going into it that something bad is going to happen, it's such an inescapable feeling. You feel helpless.
Yeah, and I think the majority of times I had that feeling was driving around on heavily IED roads. We had the benefit of living with the Iraqis in the sector that we were defending, and so we didn't have to drive much. We could kind of walk, and the IED threat against our vehicles was minimal. Now the small arms and RPG fire was at a maximum, but I always had the comfort that we're better than them, and we can kill them. I can take this situation and bend it somewhat to my will to make things happen. Whereas when it came to IEDs, I mean, that's when I was just, scared out of my mind. I remember, sitting in the back seat and I'm like, wow, there's nothing I could do about this. I'm just going to hold my breath or, sit here and just, I didn't even know what I did. And you just have this sense of doom and, you make it through the road and you're like, sweet, I didn't get blown up. It's time to go do my stuff. But yeah, anytime I had to drive anywhere far in or out of the area that we were at is when I had that sense of doom of, this is it, I'm done. And I think that was more of a control thing. I couldn't control it. I couldn't even impact it outside of deciding when and where to drive, which, is still kind of a crapshoot. So.
Yeah, certainly different experiences for different people. You talk a lot about PTSD and something that you've had to deal with. Was there any one particular event that you think led to it more than another?
I definitely had it after my first deployment. Kind of looking back and understanding, didn't know it then. I would honestly say it was after that fighting in August that everything kind of came to a head. Prior to that, we've been in an innumerable amount of small and large firefights. Like I said, you're leading from the front with Iraqis in these brutal little street fights constantly. And at first, you kind of think it's like that combat muscle memory. My brain's changing, but it's in a good way, so I can learn to kill people well, and I can keep doing it. And what you don't know is that yes, that is what's happening in your brain. You're also going to be suffering these side effects. And I think it was after that August fight that I really realized that, something was wrong with me, something was different. And I think one of the things that helped me realize it too was, we were sitting there after a particularly nasty little fight one day, and one of the cool guys that lived next door came over, and we were just smoking a cigarette, and I was sitting there shaking, but who doesn't shake after 6 hours of throwing down? And the guy's like, "Hey, make sure you get checked when you get back." I'm like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" And he's like, "No, you got it, man. Don't let it ruin your life. There's no stigma around it. I think something that he said and something I continue to use is, you go into a firefight and, you come back and you clean your weapon. Your mind's the same way. Your mind is actually a more lethal weapon. And if you don't clean it, you don't take care of it, you wouldn't go into combat with a dirty weapon. Why would you go into combat with a fouled up mind?" And it was at that point that not only I realized, I kind of gave myself permission that, yeah, I am, screwed up. But then also, I'm like, this guy who's, supposedly the tip of the spear for our entire country, Justice League of America type of guy, is cool with saying it and admitting about it and admitting to it and going to get help. And who the hell am I not to, a lowly infantry grunt, who the hell am I to say it's bad or to look down on it and not get help? So it was kind of a good and bad moment at the same time. One of realization and then one of that stigma getting pulled away.
What was more fearful for you, the combat itself or dealing with the PTSD after?
I think it's different kinds of fear. If you're talking about straight up lizard brain animal terror, definitely combat. If you're talking about the more rational fear, the kind that isn't with you when the adrenaline's pumped up, when it's kind of that fear that's resulting from your neural pathways being rerouted to kill and survive better. It's that leftover residual fear from your lizard brain screaming, and it's also combines that social fear of I'm different. I continue to do and have done self-destructive things to myself and my family. It's affecting my career. It's like that different kind of overall fear. So for me, there were definitely kind of two very different things.
When you look back on what you went through from the PTSD standpoint, what was the hardest part to deal with and overcome? Was it the flashbacks? Was it the drinking. I mean, what was the hardest thing you had to overcome with that?
The hardest thing to overcome for me was to fully admit and then kind of to submit to the idea that I had it and that I needed help and that I couldn't deal with it on my own. And that if I continued to try to and fail to deal with it on my own, I was going to continue to hurt myself and those around me. And at the time, I think it's, if you have your symptoms flare up in daily life or wherever, yeah, that's hard. But in looking back on it, the hardest thing for me was dealing with, was really coming to grips that I've done some terrible things and I've hurt people around me. And, and I'm not saying it's like an Alcoholics Anonymous thing where you're like, submit to a higher power. It was just like, dude, just come up with the fact that, you've done some kick-ass things in war, but you can't handle this on your own. You need help, and you're not weak for trying to fix yourself. And that to me, and that's still a struggle to this day, because you get a little better, or you get a little farther on in your treatment, and you get a little sense of empowerment. But for me, it's the hardest thing to keep remembering that, I can't do this on my own. I do need help, and I can't just beat it or blow it up or, fire a maneuver on it and it's done. It's a lifelong struggle that I have to keep coming after.
When you go through a deployment, you mentioned the horrible things that you have to do. And people get awards for doing horrible things sometimes. And I don't mean to denigrate the awards that we give out, but war in and of itself, the phrase is overused and it's cliched, but it's true. War is hell. And we all have to make decisions that are in the best interest of ourselves, our troops, the mission, all those things. And there are less people around on the earth because of the decisions we make. How hard is that for you to cope with?
That, coping, it means something else to me now. I think before it would be like, you've got to justify it. You've got to have the right answer. You've got to, there's a reason for this. And the more at first I'd bury it in like I'm an instrument of strategic national policy. Whatever I did, it was for the country. And you're like, well, that's bullshit because from the White House all the way on down to the platoon level, there's all sorts of it's not black and white. It's shades of gray. And so having to live with the death I've caused, whether it be friendly or enemy, or the death I've been around, and civilian too. I think that's one of the hardest things to get over. It's seeing civilian death. Coping for me became, hey, you don't have to justify it. You're not. There is no justification. It is what it is. Talk about. It's kind of hard to describe. It's literally coming up within your mind of like, hey, this happened. You can be okay with it. You can live with it. You don't have to justify it as right or wrong. You don't have to let it punish you for the rest of your life. But I think that was kind of one of the hardest things to get around is that I couldn't justify some of the stuff that we had to do in patriotism, or we were just. For God's sakes, never say we were just following orders, but just really realizing, saying, "Hey, this was war. This should happen. You did the best that you could with the information you had at the time. Don't let 2020 hindsight trip you up. Don't let like I said, patriotism or nationalism or anything like that. Don't bury those hard deeds in that because that'll just burn you up when it comes out. There's no such thing as." Like I said, black and white, red, white, and blue patriotism. It's all shades of gray. It's just learning to live with it and admit that you're in a storm and you did the best you could to get through it and do well while you're doing it.
And it's very lucid that you bring that up because we tell a lot of stories on the podcast, and I hope that we provide some context because it's easy to take these things out of context, and that's the dangerous part. For people who have never put on a uniform and never served their country and never been to war before, they don't get that context. And that's part of the struggle with PTSD is that we see things in a different light. We frame them differently because of the situation that we were in. And I don't know if people can grasp that. I do recall you saying in one of your videos on About Face, which is the National Center for PTSD website, that talking to somebody who wasn't in the military, though, was really good for you because that perspective helped you more.
Oh, definitely. I think everybody's like, they don't, I need to talk to somebody that's been there and they understand. And I quickly find out that I didn't want that. I had my, not all therapy happens in the therapist's office. I've done it on the mountain, but a lot of times some of the best therapy I've had is, having a Guinness and talking to a buddy that has been there. But for the professional help, it was really helpful for me to have somebody that wasn't trying to help me rationalize or wasn't kind of building or feeding the narrative that I already had. It was somebody that was completely separate, that was like, I don't give a shit if you were in combat. I don't care if you were lethal. Like, I care about what your brain's doing now and what your thought process is and what your body is doing. And to have somebody that, literally can care, they honor and respect your service, but like when it comes to the treatment, they're like, yeah, I don't know what that is, and I don't care, but I know what's going on in your brain chemically and psychologically, and we're going to fix it. And I think that was super helpful for me.
You did 3 deployments, and you got out. Why? What was the decision?
Yeah, I mean, three deployments in 10 years. I was tired. I had a wife at the time that I'd barely seen over. Because even when you're home, you're training so hard, you're not really there. And then with the PTSD, I could be in the same room with her for years, and it wasn't there. And so I kind of realized that I needed to fix my own house. Number 2 was a little more selfish. I'd always, when I joined, I was like, I want to be a company commander in combat, and after that, we'll see. And after 3 deployments, and I was done my company command time in combat, I was sitting around at doing an operations job at a desk, and I'm like, what the hell am I doing? I'm in the Army to go to war. I love working and fighting and training with troops. And I'm not doing that anymore. So I think it's time for, my heart's not in it. It's time for me to step aside.
Any regrets?
Oh, every day. Like every day, you think about what if, but, all I got to do is pick up the phone and call somebody that's still in. And, you forget about all the bad things that go on, all the pain in the ass stuff, the reasons why you got out. All you got to do is, pick up the phone, call somebody, some of your buddies or family that are still in, and like, hey, what'd you do this week? And, well, here's all the bullshit we had to do this week. Can you believe this? I'm like, man, I'm so glad I'm not in it. I miss the war. I miss the fighting, and I miss that. But I don't miss the daily life in the Army.
Are there any regrets for you personally about your entire experience?
Overall, no. There's decisions and there's events that happen that I look back on. But overall, I really try not to dwell on those regrets too much because number one, memory is it's such a funny thing that what actually happened and how you remember it can be 2 different things. And that's a whole podcast in itself talking about that. But
right.
And then looking at it in hindsight, of course, with 2020, I can be my worst critic and really having to learn that, hey, this is what happened. And, I regret the deaths that I caused and the deaths that happened around me, but, you got to be careful about dwelling too long on regrets. It's more of, what went right, what went wrong, how can you change it in the future? And, that kind of goes back to the whole tactical mindset anyways. But, yeah, so I try not to dwell on regrets. I remember them for what they were and try to learn from them and move forward.
As far as you dealing with PTSD and someone who went through it, what's your message to people listening to this podcast who may be struggling? What's your message to people who know somebody who they think may be struggling?
I think the biggest thing, we told this to my soldiers when I was a commander. Like I said, if you're going to combat, your weapon's dirty, you clean it. Same thing with your mind. You got to get it fixed. PTSD, it's a weird thing. It's a warrior sickness. You can even boil it, and that's kind of Homeric in its origins. But you can boil it down even further. You know, it's a rewiring of neural pathways, kind of bypass higher functions so that, you know, you can fight or flight. Like, I'm going to go get food there. Oh, there's a lion, and Bob got killed. That scares the crap out of me, and my brain just rewired. So now I'm not going to go there because I know a lion's there. It's a very primal thing, and that means it's natural, it's normal, it's okay, and it happens in war. And whether society or the people around you have that attitude or not, it doesn't matter. That's exactly what it is. Everybody from, you know, if you don't think Patton, who slashed a soldier, didn't have sleepless nights and you know, a terrible home life resulting from his PTSD from World War I, you know, you're fooling yourself. Go get the help, because it's a matter of fact. You break a bone, you go get it fixed. You know, you get sick, you take your medicine. And I would say with that, don't be intimidated by modern medicine. Like the therapeutic and pharmacological stuff, it works. Don't rely solely on it. You know, I rely on friends. And for me, in particular, I turned to mountain climbing and mountaineering, and you know, really got lost in nature, and then kind of came back and combined mountaineering and a close group of friends, as well as the therapeutic side of it, to get through it. So, you know, bottom line, it's natural. It happens to warriors. It happened to the Leonidas and Spartans. If you're into the whole 300 thing, they had it, and they talked freely about it, and they regarded it as a matter of fact. So why shouldn't you? You know, go get the help. You're normal.
Well, Josh, I want to thank you so much for your time. I want to thank you for your honesty and being willing to share your story with us. Obviously, you did some amazing things, you know, for the 101st, for yourself, for the military, all that involved. But most importantly, I think your PTSD story and helping people going forward is something that I hope a lot of people will take from this podcast, and I hope that they will go get the help that they need and look for others. But thank you again for your time. You've been an amazing guest. Best wishes, and catch up with us again real soon, man.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for putting this message out. It's important that everybody hears it all the time, and so thank you for what you do.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.